The Cafe of Unspoken Stories. The golden sun was just beginning to rise over downtown Los Angeles, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets. Early morning joggers shuffled past, their sneakers tapping in rhythmic unison against the pavement, while exhausted cafe workers inside small diners prepared for another day of serving the city's caffeine seekers. Among the countless coffee shops lining the streets was an unassuming little cafe tucked away at the corner of Pine and 8th Avenue. Its faded awning and slightly crooked sign made it easy to overlook, but to those who ventured inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries told a different story, a place where time slowed down, if only for a moment. This morning, Keanu Reeves, the globally beloved actor known for his humility and kindness, walked through the cafe's glass door. Dressed in a plain black hoodie and jeans, he moved quietly, unnoticed by the few early customers scattered across the room. Keanu had always preferred simplicity and anonymity. To him, fame was never a badge to be worn proudly, but merely a byproduct of his craft. He wasn't here for the attention. He was just another customer, a man seeking a quiet moment with a book in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Settling into a corner booth, Keanu took a deep breath, letting the aroma of freshly brewed coffee envelop him like a comforting embrace. From his spot, he could see the entire cafe, and through the large window beside him, he watched as life unfolded like a silent movie. Cars honking, vendors calling out their morning specials, and pedestrians rushing past in their usual hurry. He smiled to himself. Sometimes the beauty of life was in the little things. But then, the door jingled. A frail elderly woman stepped inside, hesitating for a moment as if unsure if she should be here. Her clothes were worn but clean, her small purse clutched tightly against her chest as she scanned the menu on the wall. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from the morning chill or something deeper, Keanu couldn't tell. He watched as she took slow, careful steps toward the counter, her eyes darting around, almost as if afraid of drawing attention to herself. Behind the counter, a young waiter, no older than his mid-20s, leaned lazily against the espresso machine, fidgeting with his phone. His pristine white apron and perfectly styled hair contrasted sharply with the woman's frail, aging appearance. Keanu didn't mean to eavesdrop, but he couldn't look away. The woman cleared her throat softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," she began hesitantly. "I was wondering if you might have something small, maybe a leftover roll or bread. I don't have much money." For a split second, the cafe fell silent, as if the city outside had paused to listen. The waiter sighed, dramatically rolling his eyes, still not looking up from his phone. "Ma'am, this isn't a charity," he said sharply. "If you can't afford it, you can't have it." Keanu's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. The woman flinched as if struck by the words themselves. Her cheeks flushed in embarrassment, and she stammered, I understand. I just thought." The waiter cut her off with a mocking smirk. "Thought what?" He snapped. "That you could just walk in here and get free food. Maybe you should try somewhere else." The few customers in the cafe turned to look, some with surprise, others with disapproval, but none spoke up. The woman lowered her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and turned toward the door, her frail shoulders slumping. And Keanu Reeves set down his coffee. His jaw tightened. He had encountered unkindness in the world before, but this was different. This was a quiet, cruel humiliation of someone who had simply asked for help. A moment of human decency. That's all she wanted. As the woman reached for the door, Keanu rose from his seat. His tall frame and composed demeanor commanded attention, even though he moved with the quiet grace of someone who didn't want to cause a scene. He reached the woman just as she was stepping outside. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice was gentle, yet firm, like a soothing balm on an open wound. The elderly woman turned to face him, her eyes wide with surprise and embarrassment. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said softly. A silent stand of kindness. The Los Angeles morning hummed with life just outside the small cafe on Pine and 8th Avenue. The sharp scent of roasted coffee beans lingered in the air, and the chatter of hurried pedestrians filled the streets. But inside the cafe, time felt like it had stopped. Keanu Reeves stood near the door, his calm yet commanding presence drawing every pair of eyes in the room. The elderly woman, her frail hands trembling, looked up at him with uncertainty. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Keanu offered her a gentle smile. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his deep voice soothing yet firm. The woman hesitated, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Oh dear, I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she murmured, glancing back toward the counter where the young waiter still stood, arms crossed, watching the interaction with a smirk. Keanu shook his head. "You didn't cause trouble. You just asked for help." The woman looked away, blinking rapidly as if to stop herself from crying. "I shouldn't have asked," she whispered. Keanu's expression softened. Everyone needs help sometimes. Then, before she could protest, he gently took her hand and led her back inside the cafe. The weight of a stare. As they stepped back inside, the waiter's smirk faltered. Keanu's quiet authority filled the room, and a few customers leaned in, their curiosity piqued. The waiter cleared his throat and straightened up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir, if you're planning to pay for her, that's fine, but we don't do handouts." His voice carried an edge of defensiveness now, as if realizing he might have made a mistake. Keanu said nothing at first. Instead, he pulled out a chair for the elderly woman and gestured for her to sit. She hesitated before finally lowering herself into the seat, still clutching her worn-out purse. Then, Keanu walked up to the counter, his gaze locking onto the waiters. The younger man shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing an invisible weight pressing down on him. Keanu placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. "Bring her the best breakfast you serve," he said, his voice steady. "And a cup of tea. Make sure it's hot." The waiter stared at the bill, then back at Keanu. "Sir, Keanu's calm gaze didn't waver. "And while you're at it, bring me the same." The silence in the cafe deepened. The waiter's confidence cracked for just a second, and then he nodded stiffly. "Of course, sir." He quickly grabbed a menu and disappeared into the kitchen, a meal served with dignity. As Keanu sat across from the elderly woman, he noticed her hands still trembling slightly. "You don't have to be nervous," he said gently. She exhaled shakily. "It's just, I haven't sat in a cafe like this in years." Keanu tilted his head slightly, encouraging her to go on. She swallowed. "My husband and I used to come here before he passed." Keanu's expression softened. "His name was George," she continued. "We were together for 40 years. But after he was gone, things got difficult. Bills piled up. My pension barely covers rent." She gave a sad chuckle. "I don't have children, and most of my friends have moved away or..." She trailed off. Keanu didn't need her to finish the sentence. He understood. Loneliness was an ache that no amount of time could fully heal. Before he could respond, the waiter reappeared, placing 2 steaming plates in front of them. Pancakes drizzled with maple syrup, fluffy scrambled eggs, golden hash browns, a meal that looked like warmth and comfort itself. The elderly woman's eyes widened. "This is too much," she whispered. Keanu smiled. "You deserve it." For the first time since she walked in, the woman let out a small laugh, soft but real. Tears glistened in her eyes, but this time they weren't from humiliation. They were from gratitude. An audience that listens. From the corner of his eye, Keanu noticed something. The other customers in the cafe were still watching. Their expressions changed. A middle-aged woman who had been scrolling through her phone now looked ashamed. A man in a business suit, who had ignored the scene earlier, now seemed deep in thought. Even the waiter, who lingered near the counter, avoided eye contact as he wiped non-existent crumbs from the counter. Keanu had said very few words, yet the room had felt his message loud and clear. Kindness wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about seeing someone when no one else does. As the elderly woman took her first bite, her eyes filled with tears again. But this time, Keanu simply picked up his fork and took a bite of his own food, allowing her to enjoy the moment in peace. A lesson remembered. A few minutes later, the waiter approached the table again, his shoulders slightly hunched. He still had the air of someone too proud to fully apologize, but there was a change in his posture, a subtle shift, like someone who had just realized a mistake they didn't know they had made. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I didn't mean to be rude earlier." Keanu looked up, meeting his gaze. The waiter swallowed before adding, "I shouldn't have spoken to her that way." Keanu nodded slowly. What you do in moments when no one is watching is what defines you. The waiter blinked, as if the words had hit deeper than expected. He nodded stiffly, then turned and walked away, leaving Keanu and the elderly woman to finish their meal. The next step. As the meal came to an end, Keanu took out his wallet and placed another $100 on the table, slipping it into the elderly woman's purse before she could refuse. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. She clasped his hand for a moment, tears threatening to spill again. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the food, but for making me feel seen." Keanu smiled. "You always were. The world just forgets to look sometimes." Then, with a final nod, he stood up, leaving behind not just money, but a moment of humanity that no one in the cafe would soon forget. The ripple effect of kindness. The morning sun had fully risen over downtown Los Angeles, casting long golden beams through the large cafe windows. Outside, the city bustled with its usual chaos. Horns blared, hurried footsteps tapped against the pavement, and voices blended into a never-ending symphony of urban life. But inside the cafe, something had changed. The atmosphere felt different, softer, quieter, as if a profound moment had settled into the very walls of the small shop on Pine and 8th Avenue. Keanu Reeves, in his plain black hoodie and jeans, had just stood up from his table after sharing a warm meal with the elderly woman who had been humiliated just moments before. The lingering scent of maple syrup and coffee mixed with the unspoken thoughts in the minds of every customer who had witnessed what had happened. But the moment wasn't over yet. A stranger steps forward. As Keanu helped the elderly woman up from her seat, a man in his late 40s, wearing a neat gray suit, suddenly stepped forward from across the cafe. He was tall, with streaks of silver in his dark hair, and his piercing blue eyes held a thoughtful intensity. He had been watching the scene unfold from the beginning, though he had remained silent, until now. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks as he approached. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but carrying a note of admiration. Keanu turned to him, offering a polite nod. "Yes." The man glanced at the elderly woman, then back at Keanu. That was quite something to witness. Keanu remained silent, waiting. The man smiled faintly, shaking his head, as if he still couldn't believe what he had seen. "You didn't just buy her food. You gave her dignity. That's rare." Keanu simply shrugged. "It's not rare. It's just overlooked." The man's expression shifted slightly, as if those words had struck a chord. He then reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and held it out. "I'd like to pay that kindness forward," he said. "I own a few local businesses, including a bakery just a few blocks from here. We always need extra hands in the kitchen. If you'd be open to it, ma'am, I'd like to offer you a job." The elderly woman's eyes widened in shock. "A job?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. "Nothing strenuous, just helping prepare bread in the mornings, maybe assisting with packaging. Something light, with good pay. You'd have fresh meals every day, and a community that looks out for each other." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she stared at the card in disbelief. Keanu watched her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's your choice," he said gently. The elderly woman looked between the man and Keanu, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the card. Finally, with a deep breath, she took it. I'd love that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The cafe, which had been silent, suddenly breathed again. A quiet murmur spread through the customers as they exchanged glances, processing the unexpected kindness that had unfolded before them. An unspoken lesson. As the elderly woman clutched the card to her chest, Keanu turned toward the waiter. The young man had retreated to the counter, his earlier arrogance replaced with unease. He had witnessed everything. The shameful rejection, the silent correction, and now the unexpected turn of events. His fingers tightened around the rag he had been using to wipe down the counter, as if wrestling with something internally. Keanu approached him, stopping just a few feet away. "What's your name?" Keanu asked, his tone neutral. The waiter hesitated, then mumbled, "Tyler." Keanu nodded. "Tyler, do you like working here?" Tyler blinked, startled by the question. Yeah, I guess." Keanu studied him for a moment. "Then why do you act like you hate it?" The cafe went dead silent again. Tyler's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Keanu wasn't accusing him. His tone wasn't harsh, nor was there any anger behind his words. It was a simple question, asked in the same way someone might ask about the weather. But that made it hit even harder. Tyler looked away, shifting uncomfortably. "I don't hate it. I don't know. People suck sometimes." Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, they do. But they also surprise you." Tyler didn't respond. Keanu sighed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a $50 bill. He placed it on the counter. "Next time someone comes in needing help, use this instead of your attitude." Tyler stared at the bill, his jaw tightening. His fingers twitched as if he wanted to shove it away, but instead, he just nodded. Keanu didn't push further. He had said all he needed to say. A walk toward the future. As Keanu and the elderly woman stepped out of the cafe, the warm sunlight kissed their skin. She turned to him, still holding the business card tightly in one hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured. Keanu smiled, slipping his hands into his hoodie pockets. "Just show up on your first day." The woman chuckled, her eyes still wet with gratitude. "You're a good man, Mr. Reeves." Keanu shrugged playfully. "Just a man who likes pancakes." She laughed. A real, hearty laugh that carried the weight of years of hardship and the lightness of newfound hope. As she walked away, Keanu stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd, a new sense of purpose in her steps. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and blended back into the city, just another face in the crowd. Another small act of kindness, another ripple in the vast ocean of the world. And though he never sought recognition, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes it wasn't about changing the whole world. Sometimes it was about changing one person's world. And today, he had done just that. The power of a single act. The city of Los Angeles never truly slowed down. Even as the morning stretched into midday, the rhythmic pulse of honking cars, hurried footsteps, and distant chatter filled the air. Yet, somewhere within the sea of movement, an unseen ripple had begun, a ripple created by a simple act of kindness. Keanu Reeves had left the cafe, his presence now just a memory lingering in the minds of those who had witnessed what happened inside. But for some, it wasn't just a passing moment, it was something far greater. And for one person in particular, it was about to change everything. Tyler's silent struggle. Behind the counter of the cafe, Tyler stood frozen, staring down at the $50 bill Keanu had left for him. His mind was spinning. For the last hour, he had replayed the scene over and over, the elderly woman's quiet shame, the way Keanu had stepped in, and the unspoken challenge in his words. Next time someone comes in needing help, use this instead of your attitude. The words felt like a punch to his gut, but not in the way he had expected. Tyler had been working at the cafe for almost 2 years, and he had seen all kinds of people walk through those doors. Wealthy businessmen in tailored suits, stressed out students, exhausted mothers, and yes, people like that elderly woman. People who needed help. People he had ignored. Why? Tyler ran a hand through his messy hair, suddenly feeling suffocated by the weight of his own thoughts. Why did he treat people like that? Maybe it was because he hated this job. Or maybe it was because life had hardened him. People had never been kind to him growing up. His father had walked out when he was 6. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. No one had ever given him a handout, so why should he do the same for others? And yet, Keanu Reeves hadn't just given that woman money. He had given her dignity. Tyler swallowed hard, gripping the counter. He had spent so long thinking the world was cruel, but maybe, just maybe, he had been part of the problem. For the first time in his life, he felt a deep shame creeping into his chest. And he didn't like it. Not one bit. A different kind of customer. Later that afternoon, the cafe door jingled again. Tyler, lost in thought, barely looked up. "Welcome to Pine and 8th Cafe. What can I get you?" He muttered out of habit. "Just a coffee, please." The voice was soft. A woman's voice, but something about it made Tyler glance up. The woman was young, maybe in her early 30s, dressed in a simple but well-worn coat. She had tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much struggle in too little time. And in her arms, she held a little girl, no older than 4 or 5. The child clung tightly to her mother's neck, her curly brown hair messy, her big eyes filled with uncertainty as she looked around the cafe. Tyler's stomach twisted. She had the same look as the elderly woman from earlier, the look of someone trying to disappear. The mother hesitated before pulling a few crumpled dollar bills from her pocket. "Just one coffee," she repeated, offering the money with trembling fingers. Tyler's fingers brushed against the $50 bill still in his pocket. And in that moment, he made a choice. He stepped back from the register and grabbed a plate, piling on a fresh croissant, a muffin, and a small fruit cup. Then he poured 2 hot chocolates, one for the mother, one for the little girl. He placed the tray in front of them without saying a word. The woman's eyes widened in confusion. I can't afford this," she stammered. Tyler simply shook his head. "It's already paid for," he said, his voice quieter than usual. The woman blinked rapidly, her lips parting in silent shock. Her little girl, still clutching onto her, let out a small gasp when she saw the hot chocolate. "For me," the child whispered. Tyler nodded, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't about the money. It was about choosing to see people, just like Keanu had said. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, giving Tyler the first genuine smile he had seen all day. "Thank you," she whispered. Tyler cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward under the weight of her gratitude. "Just have a good day," he muttered, turning back to the counter. But as the woman took her seat, holding her daughter close, Tyler couldn't help but glance over one last time. And for the first time in his life, he understood something. Kindness wasn't weakness. It was power. The internet takes notice. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, another person had been watching. A woman, maybe in her mid-40s, sat at a nearby table, her laptop open in front of her. She had seen everything. The way Keanu had stepped in earlier, the way Tyler had hesitated, and now, the way he had changed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she started typing furiously. She was a journalist, a freelance writer who specialized in stories that mattered. And she had just found one. The unexpected spotlight. The air inside Pine and 8th Cafe was no longer the same. Something had changed. It wasn't just in the subtle shift of mood or the way people glanced at each other with softened expressions. It was deeper than that. Like an invisible wave of kindness had rippled through the space, touching everything in its path. Tyler, The young waiter who had once worn his indifference like armor now felt like a different person. He still wasn't sure how to process what had happened. First, Keanu Reeves had walked in, silently challenging his view of the world. Then, he had seen how one act of compassion could transform a moment of shame into one of hope. And now, he had done something he never thought he would. He had helped someone without being forced to. And it felt good. But Tyler had no idea that his decision was about to go far beyond the four walls of this cafe. The journalist's story goes live. Across the street, seated at an outdoor table, the woman with the laptop finished typing her article. She took a deep breath, rereading what she had just written. A simple act of kindness by Keanu Reeves sparks a chain reaction in a small cafe, changing lives forever. She smiled to herself. It was more than just a celebrity moment. This wasn't about Hollywood or fame or scripted good deeds. This was real. She had seen it unfold with her own eyes. The elderly woman's humiliation, Keanu's quiet intervention, the transformation in the young waiter, and now, the moment where he had paid it forward. It was a story that needed to be told. With a final tap of her finger, she hit publish. The article was live. And within minutes, the internet took notice. The viral storm begins. The first few shares were from local news outlets, small blogs that picked up inspiring human interest stories. But then, something unexpected happened. The story spread like wildfire. Twitter exploded. People began sharing screenshots of the article, adding their own captions. This is why Keanu Reeves is the best person alive. A little kindness can go a long way. We need more of this. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just wear hoodies and buy pancakes for strangers. Instagram flooded with reposts. A photo someone had taken of Keanu inside the cafe surfaced online. Him sitting with the elderly woman, a small smile on his face, steam rising from his coffee. Morning news channels started covering it. Actor Keanu Reeves quietly helps a struggling woman in need. His simple act starts a ripple effect of kindness. Within hours, the story reached millions of people. And then something even bigger happened. Keanu himself saw it. Keanu Reeves reads the headlines. Keanu had spent the rest of the day in his usual routine, filming for an upcoming project, meeting with a few people about charity work, and making sure to take a quiet ride on his motorcycle before the city got too crowded. His phone buzzed a few times, but he ignored it, until one notification caught his attention. His assistant, Brian, had sent him a message. "Brian, you might want to see this, man. The internet is talking about you again. But this time, it's different." Keanu frowned slightly, curiosity piqued. He opened the link Brian had sent, and as he read the article, something inside him shifted. It wasn't the headline that struck him. It wasn't even the fact that his name was trending worldwide. It was the part about Tyler, the young waiter, choosing to pay kindness forward. Keanu leaned back in his chair, a slow smile creeping onto his face. This was why he believed in small acts of good. Because sometimes they don't stay small. Back at the cafe, a customer returns. The next morning, the elderly woman, Mrs. Harper, walked back into the cafe. But this time, she wasn't there to ask for help. She was there for her first day of work. The cafe owner had read the viral article and had personally called her to confirm that the job offer was real. Now she stood in the doorway, wearing a fresh blouse and a warm smile, ready to start over. Tyler, still adjusting to his new outlook on life, felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest when he saw her. Pride. The woman he had once turned away in cruelty now stood before him with dignity. She wasn't a helpless stranger anymore. She was part of their team. Tyler approached her, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hey, I can show you where we keep the supplies." Mrs. Harper smiled at him, and to his surprise, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, dear," she said, "for seeing me this time." Tyler swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah, yeah, of course. And just like that, a new chapter had begun. Keanu's final move. That afternoon, as customers came and went, a sleek black car pulled up outside the cafe. The doors opened, and Keanu Reeves stepped out. The cafe fell silent. Tyler, who had just finished serving a table, nearly dropped a tray of coffee cups. Mrs. Harper gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Keanu pushed his hood back slightly and gave a small nod as he walked inside like he belonged there. "Hey, Tyler," he said smoothly. Tyler felt his throat go dry. Hey, man. I mean, Mr. Reeves. I mean, hi." Keanu chuckled. "You did something good." Tyler stared at him. I just did what you did," he admitted. "It wasn't a big deal." Keanu shook his head, his gaze steady. "That's where you're wrong. It's always a big deal." Then, without another word, he reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of pulling out money, he pulled out something else. A note. He placed it in Tyler's hand and patted his shoulder. "Read it later," he said. With one final nod, Keanu turned and walked back toward the door. Tyler just stood there, heart pounding, as he watched Keanu leave the cafe as quietly as he had entered it. Slowly, he unfolded the note. Inside, in neat handwriting, were just 4 words. "Kindness is contagious. Spread it." Tyler stared at it for a long moment, his eyes burning. Then, with a slow breath, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. A reminder that sometimes one small act was enough to change everything. And he would never forget that again. The tidal wave of change. The viral storm had not only reached Keanu Reeves, but had also transformed the little cafe on Pine and 8th into an unexpected symbol of kindness. In just a matter of days, everything had changed. The cafe's new reality. Customers were pouring in, not just for coffee, but for something greater. The story of what had happened had touched hearts across the world, and now people were stopping by the cafe just to experience the energy of the place. Journalists showed up, snapping photos of the cafe and asking for interviews. Coffee lovers came from different neighborhoods, just to say they had been there. Generous strangers began leaving large tips, paying for meals in advance for those who couldn't afford them. And the most unexpected part, people started leaving notes on the walls. It started with just one small sticky note left by a young woman who had read the viral article. "Be kind. You never know who needs it." Then another. "A little warmth goes a long way." And another. "If Keanu Reeves can be nice, so can you." Soon, a whole wall of the cafe had been transformed into a mosaic of handwritten messages, words of encouragement, gratitude, and kindness from total strangers. The cafe's owner, an older man named Mr. Ramirez, was astonished. "I opened this cafe 20 years ago," he muttered, shaking his head as he looked at the wall. "But I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Tyler. And for the first time since he had started working at the cafe, he felt genuinely proud to be there. Mrs. Harper's first paycheck. A week after the incident, Mrs. Harper arrived at work wearing a new light blue apron, gifted to her by the cafe's staff. Her smile was radiant. She had spent her entire life working hard, raising a family, and doing everything she could to survive. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she had a place again. On her first payday, Mr. Ramirez handed her an envelope, but before she could thank him, he placed something extra inside, a free meal voucher for the next month. She gasped, her hands shaking slightly. "But I can pay for my food now," she said, looking at him with wide eyes. Mr. Ramirez smiled. "I know, but this isn't about money. It's about making sure you never feel afraid to ask for help again." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time, they were happy tears. Tyler's unexpected transformation. Tyler had changed in ways he never thought possible. He no longer saw customers as transactions, he saw people. When a single father came in looking exhausted, Tyler gave him a coffee on the house. When a nervous teenage girl had only a few crumpled bills, he covered the rest of her meal. When a struggling musician played his guitar outside, Tyler invited him in for a warm drink. It wasn't out of obligation. It was because Tyler finally understood something. People don't need grand gestures. They just need to be seen. And for the first time in his life, Tyler was the one doing the seeing. A gift from Keanu. 2 weeks after Keanu's visit, a mysterious package arrived at the cafe. The staff gathered around as Mr. Ramirez unwrapped it. Inside was a beautiful wooden plaque with a single engraving. Kindness is contagious. Spread it. KR. The cafe went silent. Tyler stared at the plaque, his heart racing. Keanu hadn't just left a note. He had left a permanent reminder that what had happened here mattered. Mr. Ramirez wiped his eyes and let out a choked laugh. "Well," he said, holding up the plaque, "looks like we've got a new centerpiece." And just like that, the cafe, once just another forgotten coffee shop in the city, became something extraordinary. A place where kindness was the currency. Tyler's big decision. That night, after closing, Tyler sat at his usual spot near the counter, staring at the plaque. He had been thinking a lot lately about who he used to be, about what he had learned, and about what came next. His fingers traced over the engraved words as he made a decision. The next morning, he walked into Mr. Ramirez's office. "I need to talk to you," he said, standing tall. Mr. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" Tyler took a deep breath. "No, I think I'm ready for something more. I don't want to just serve coffee. I want to help run this place, make it even better." For a moment, Mr. Ramirez said nothing. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "So, you want to be a manager?" Tyler nodded. "Yeah." Mr. Ramirez chuckled. "I was wondering when you'd ask." Tyler blinked. "Wait. What?" "Son, I've been watching you." Mr. Ramirez leaned back in his chair. "A month ago, you were just another kid going through the motions. Now, you're someone people look up to." Tyler felt his face heat up. "I wouldn't say." "Take the compliment." Mr. Ramirez grinned. "You've earned it." And with that, the boy who once scoffed at kindness became a leader in a cafe built on it. The final ripple. Keanu Reeves never came back to the cafe. He didn't have to. Because what he had done wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about starting something bigger than himself. He had walked into a simple cafe, performed a small act of kindness, and walked out again. But the world had changed because of it. Mrs. Harper had a new job and community. Tyler had found his purpose. A forgotten cafe had become a beacon of kindness. And across the world, people read the story and thought to themselves, "Maybe I should do something kind today." And so the ripple continued. One act at a time. One life at a time. Because kindness was never meant to stop. It was meant to spread. The grand final. A kindness that echoes forever. The little cafe on Pine and 8th had become something more than just a coffee shop. It had become a symbol, a place where people came not just for caffeine but for hope. The once faded cafe had found new life, and its walls, once bare, were now covered in hundreds of handwritten notes from strangers, each one a message of kindness, left behind by someone touched by the story. What started as a single moment of compassion had grown into something far bigger than anyone had imagined. But the ripple wasn't done yet, because one final twist was still to come. A special delivery for Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves had never expected to hear about the cafe again. After all, he had only done what felt right. Helping a stranger, showing kindness where it was needed. That was who he was. He had never wanted attention for it. So when his assistant Brian walked into his trailer holding a large package, Keanu was caught off guard. "You got something in the mail, man," Brian said, setting the box down on the table. "From a cafe in LA." Keanu raised an eyebrow, setting down his script. "A cafe?" Curious, he grabbed a knife and carefully sliced the box open. Inside, he found a thick envelope sitting on top of something wrapped in tissue paper. Keanu opened the envelope first. It was a handwritten letter, not typed, but penned in neat, careful handwriting. As he unfolded it, his eyes moved over the words. "Dear Mr. Reeves, we don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, we just want to say thank you. What you did that morning wasn't just about buying a meal. You changed lives. Mrs. Harper has a job now. She's happier than she's been in years. Tyler, remember the young waiter? He's the cafe's new manager. He learned something that day, something that changed him. And this cafe, it's become a place where people leave messages of hope, of kindness, of love. Because of you, people are remembering what it means to care about each other. We wanted to send you something in return. Not money, not a gift, but something that carries the spirit of what you started. We hope you'll accept it. With all our gratitude, the staff and customers of Pine and 8th Cafe." Keanu let out a slow breath, his heart full. He reached into the box and unwrapped the tissue paper. Inside was a beautiful wooden frame, and within it, a piece of the cafe's famous wall of kindness. Dozens of sticky notes, carefully preserved and arranged behind glass. Messages from strangers, from people who had walked into the cafe, read the story, and felt inspired to leave behind their own words of kindness. Keanu's eyes moved over the notes, each one touching in its own way. Kindness is contagious. Pass it on. One good deed can change someone's life. A single act of love can ripple forever. Because of Keanu Reeves, I bought a stranger breakfast today. Keanu smiled softly, his fingers tracing the edge of the frame. This was what mattered. Not the money, not the fame, not the headlines, but the hearts he had touched. He set the frame down gently and leaned back, letting the moment sink in. Then he picked up his phone and typed out a message. "Hey Brian, call the cafe. I want to send them something too." Because kindness, after all, was never meant to be one-sided. Back at the cafe, an unbelievable surprise. A week later, the cafe doors burst open, and Tyler nearly dropped a cup of coffee when he saw what was happening outside. A delivery truck had pulled up, and men in uniform were carrying large boxes into the shop. Mr. Ramirez came rushing out of his office. What in the world? The delivery driver handed him a clipboard and grinned. "Special delivery, courtesy of Mr. Keanu Reeves." Everyone in the cafe stared in shock. Tyler and Mrs. Harper exchanged wide-eyed glances as they watched the delivery men unload brand-new espresso machines, a fresh stock of premium coffee beans, and even a brand-new pastry oven. But that wasn't all. One of the last boxes held something that brought Mrs. Harper to tears, a brand-new chair with plush cushions, labeled with her name. Keanu hadn't just sent a thank-you gift. He had given the cafe everything it needed to thrive. On the final box, a simple note was taped. "Kindness deserves to keep growing. Pass it on. KR." The cafe erupted in cheers and laughter, customers clapping, employees hugging, and Mrs. Harper wiping at her eyes with shaking hands. Tyler stood at the center of it all, grinning like an idiot. "That guy," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. But he couldn't stop smiling. Because this time, he wasn't just witnessing kindness. He was part of it. And that made all the difference. A legacy of goodness. The cafe only grew from there. More and more people came, not just for the coffee, but for the story, the kindness, and the feeling that this place was something special. Mrs. Harper became the heart of the cafe, greeting every customer with warmth. Tyler, now manager, led with kindness instead of cynicism. The sticky note wall, it doubled in size. And Keanu Reeves, he never stepped foot in the cafe again. But his kindness remained. And somewhere out there, in a world too often filled with coldness and indifference, the story of a small cafe, an elderly woman, a reformed waiter, and a Hollywood legend continued to spread. Because kindness never stops. It simply ripples onward. And that perhaps is the most powerful story of all.